Good evening, everyone. So I want to finish up here with chapter 15 so that we're on track for Monday for chapter 16. So what I want to bring your attention to is where we stopped at. And I want to also mention again this Taylor rule equation. You need to know the numbers. You need to be able to pull them up. In addition to that, whenever we say inflation rate, if the inflation rate is, let's say, 3%, in this equation, as you can see, you should put in a 3, not a 0.03, in order to get to the Taylor rule. So these should all be put in as integers instead of decimals. Whatever the percentage is, give the percent in an integer number. So we talked about the Taylor rule and for predicting the federal funds rate and why it didn't work after 2008, because it would have called for negative interest rates, and that's not possible for the federal funds rate. So another way to look at it is what we're going to call inflation targeting, which basically what they do is say, hey, here's what I want prices to rise by. Let me set our monetary policy so that we can then hit that target. Okay, so things such as Canada, Sweden, Britain, Norway, US, they tend to also follow the same type of inflation targeting. Now, the major difference between the Taylor rule and inflation targeting is that inflation targeting is saying, here's what we want inflation to be in the future. And whereas the Taylor rule says, okay, what was inflation this past year? Set the federal funds rate based on that. So inflation targeting is forward-looking based on expectations, whereas the Taylor rule is backwards-looking. So let's talk about 2008 and our zero-bound problem. So interest rates, in a way, can't go below zero. That kind of limits our power with respect to monetary policy. So as we've talked about, monetary policy tends to be with short-term, 3 to 6 month type treasury bills. So the Fed decided to do this creative thing back in 2010 that they called quantitative easing, where they would basically buy longer term bonds in addition to these short-term bonds. So what they were hoping is that this would drive down these long-term interest rates and have this expansionary effect on the economy. Okay, so now in the 11 o'clock class, I know we already had a little bit of a spoiler alert for this, but what happens in the long run? So we talk about, hey, we have this monetary policy, here's how it shifts aggregate demand. The economy is dynamic, it's constantly changing and evolving. So what happens in the long run as time goes by? So what about flexible wages, right? As time goes by, we've talked about wages can change. Well, there's this cute little weeble wobble punching bag to the right there, but we tend to believe that in the long run, changes in the quantity of money is going to affect the price level, but not the output or the interest rate. So I and Y star will be unaffected. However, we will have a price level change. So let's look at how that's gonna play out. So we first increase the money supply, right? We do some expansionary monetary policy, and we all know how to get from one graph to another. So if we increase the money supply, reducing the interest rate, reduced interest rate leads to increased investment spending, higher incomes, consumers spend more, and therefore aggregate demand is going to increase. Now we're at a higher price level, but what are we sitting at now? We're at an inflationary gap. And then we've talked about already what happens when there's an inflationary gap. What happens to wages? Right? You expect me to produce more as a worker, so what are you going to have to do if you're the boss? You're going to have to pay me more. So wages are going to go up. That means the inputs have gotten more expensive. So therefore, it will shift our short-run aggregate supply curve to the left, back towards potential output, but at a higher price level. So over time, we can see that, hey, any sort of policy that's taking us away from long-run equilibrium is going to have the effect of, in this case, raising the price level. So now what happens in the money market? Well, there's something we call monetary neutrality. So these changes in the money supply have no real effect in the economy. And there's our, in the long run, we're all dead, right? That's too simple of a task for an economist to just say that once the storm is over, the sea will be calm again. So let's see what happens to the changes in the money whenever we change the money supply. We talked about, hey, we're going to increase the money supply 2 slides ago. So now, lowers the interest rate in the short run. But what's going to happen? So maybe pause this and think about it. Whenever we drop this interest rate, we already showed that aggregate demand will increase. And whenever aggregate demand increases as time goes by, wages go up. Short-run aggregate supply will shift to the left. That leads to an increase in price level. Going back to the beginning of this chapter, one of the 4 factors that shifts our money demand curve, one of them is changes in the aggregate price level. As the price level increases, now all of a sudden you need more cash whenever you go to the deli to get your lunch, for instance. Whenever that happens, that means we're going to increase our money demand. So now think about how that's going to work here with this picture. Increase in money demand. All of a sudden, with this increase in money supply and then an increase in money demand, we end up at a higher M bar, right, quantity of money, but right back at the same interest rate over time. So interest rates go back to their original level, output goes back to its original level or its potential level, but the price level is permanently higher. So that's a cute little picture I've painted for you. You're probably asking yourself, is this actually going to happen? So it's not exact, right? Very few things are completely exact. But as you can see, in general, what this graph is showing you is this increase in the price level and how it relates to the increase in money supply. And we see that there is indeed, with a 45-degree line, right? That's a 1-to-1 slope, a slope of +1. We see that in general, US, Switzerland, Canada, India, they're a little bit below the line, but they're still following this relatively straight linear trend for it. So that is the end of me talking to you about this chapter. There are, at the end of these slides, 3 practice problems along with answers that you can have the opportunity to give it a shot. So please feel free to print out the slides and give these practice problems a try. And please let me know if you have any questions. See you guys on Friday.